Let's now talk about what is happening in the Middle East, where the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reconvened his war cabinet following a missile and drone attack on Israel by Iran over the weekend. Iran has sought to justify its attack, saying Western countries should appreciate its restraint. Israel's allies, including the US and the UK, urging restraint rather than retaliation. Our chief international correspondent Lise Doucet has the latest.
Welcome to Jerusalem. Well, the big question across this region last week was, what will Iran do next? And now this week, the same question is being asked about Israel. Its war cabinet met last night for 3 hours to deliberate about Israel's response after that unprecedented attack by Iran in the early hours of Sunday morning. 350 suicide drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. And now again today, the war cabinet has convened. No statement yet about what they will do, but reports coming out of the deliberations so far indicate that there is a consensus emerging that Israel will have to retaliate, not now, but at a time and in a manner of their own choosing. This kind of tension is reverberating in capitals around the world, including in New York last night, where the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres led a special meeting of the UN Security Council, warning that the region was on the edge of an abyss. It's one of the few places where Israeli and Iranian top diplomats can see each other face to face. Israel underlined that Iran, in his words, had crossed all red lines. Iran said its attack was a move of legitimate self-defense. And today, Iranian officials are saying that they acted with restraint. That's now how Israel sees it, or its allies. Let's just take a look at all the latest developments with this report from our Middle East correspondent, Yolan Nell.
Israel's air defences called to action. In the early hours on Sunday, fighter jets battled waves of Iranian drones and missiles fired at Israeli targets. It marked the first time Iran has attacked Israel directly from its own soil. Explosions could be heard widely, including in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Israel says that 99% of more than 300 drones and missiles launched by Iran were intercepted. Some of those that got through hit here in the sensitive Nevatim Air Force Base in southern Israel. Nearby, 7-year-old Amina Hassouna was seriously injured when a missile fragment struck her house.
The children were frightened and wanted to run away from home, and that's when the missile hit our house.
The Israeli war cabinet met yesterday to plan its next move. One of its members, Benny Gantz, said Israel would exact a price from Iran when the time is right. And last night, the UN Security Council met in an emergency meeting following the attacks. Israel called for sanctions on Iran and reiterated its right to a response.
This attack crossed every red line, and Israel reserves the legal right to retaliate. We are not a frog in boiling water. We are a nation of lions. Following such a massive and direct attack on Israel, the entire world, let alone Israel, cannot settle for inaction. We will defend our future.
Iran's ambassador to the UN told the meeting that its actions, which were in retaliation for a deadly airstrike on its consulate in Syria, were justified.
These countries, especially the United States, have shielded Israel from any responsibility for the Gaza massacre, while they have denied Iran's inherent right to self-defense against the Israeli armed attack on our diplomatic premises.
Amid rising tensions, the attacks have received widespread international condemnation.
The scale and nature of Iran's heinous assault, the first direct attack from Iran on Israeli soil, poses grave risks to the security and stability of citizens across the Middle East.
Now, world leaders are pressing for de-escalation in a bid for calm in the region.
The Middle East is on the brink. The people of the region are confronting a real danger of a devastating, full-scale conflict. Now is the time to defuse and de-escalate.
All eyes are on Israel and how it responds.
Yolande Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
So in a moment of unprecedented military action, a war of words and intensifying diplomacy. Even world powers who normally disagree on most issues are now sending the same message. The Kremlin in Moscow saying it was extremely concerned about the possibility for escalation. The French President Emmanuel Macron saying that everything had to be done to avoid a conflagration in the Middle East. And this morning, Britain's Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has been sending a message to Israel to see its taking down of Iran's wave of projectiles as a victory and not to retaliate.
I think it's important to be respectful on these occasions. A country has had a massive attack from a dangerous and malign actor in the region. They are considering, the Israeli cabinet has been meeting already to consider that. Our advice is don't retaliate. Take the win. Recognise Iran has suffered a double defeat. Defeat as almost all their weapons were shot down, and defeat because the world can now see their true nature. That the right thing to do is to pivot now and look at Hamas and say they must release the hostages. So we wouldn't be supporting retaliatory action, but we're respectful of other countries.
Lord Cameron, well, last night at the UN Security Council, 2 members, the United States and the UK, condemned Iran's strike. And in the midst of this criticism, Iran has spoken out again. Today, a Foreign Ministry spokesperson defended Iran's action, saying it had acted in restraint.
Instead of making accusations, the Western countries should appreciate the Islamic Republic of Iran's restrained and responsible actions towards the stability and safety in the region. Western countries should blame themselves and answer to public opinion for the measures they have taken against the 7 months of war crimes committed.
The view from Iran. Well, for a very long time, Iran prided itself on what it called strategic patience. In other words, not responding immediately whenever it was provoked or threatened. But in Tehran now, senior military and political officials are using a new phrase. They call it a new equation. To get some insight into Iran's thinking, we're joined by Mohammed Ali Shabani. He's the editor of Amouaj Media. Welcome to BBC News, Mohammed.
Thank you for having me.
This sounds like a very dangerous moment, with Iran saying that from now on there is this new equation that when it is hit, it will hit back immediately. Is that how you understand it?
Those are the precise words of the chief commander of the IRGC indeed. He stated that not only Iranian personnel, but any Iranian assets and interests that may be hit will receive a direct response from Iran. And I think this is a reaction more than an action. And what I mean by that is that the April 1st bombing of the Iranian consulate in Syria, which initiated the Iranian attack that we saw in Israel, was a kind of change in the rules of the game, so to speak. That previously diplomatic premises were off limits, and Israel appears to have wanted to change that. What we're seeing now from Iran's side is to say, okay, we're going to change the rules of the game, so will we. So this is a very dangerous period because both sides are trying to lay out new rules of the game.
Both sides, aside from this tit for tat, want to establish a powerful deterrence. In other words, to make it clear to their enemy that there will be a cost if they do strike. Now, there are some observers who say Iran strengthened its deterrence by showing its willingness to send this wave of missiles and drones, but others say it has weakened it because almost none of them reached their target. How would you see it?
I think there's obviously different ways of looking at what happened. To me, the operation was carefully choreographed. It was telegraphed in advance, days in advance, to Iran's neighbors, to the United States. Iran also made the launches of, for instance, drones from its own territory, which meant that Israel had many hours of forewarning. I think that in a real-life direct confrontation, which Iran has warned that it will engage in, unless if Israel continues to take action against Iran, things will be very different. There will be no advance warning, there will be no choreographing. Drones probably will not only be launched from Iran, and most importantly of all, Iran's regional allies will also participate. And in such a scenario, I think very easily a group such as Hezbollah in Lebanon can overwhelm Israeli air defenses. So I think what this episode told us all is that the countries which shot down many of the missiles, I think did both Iran and Israel a favor. They've acted to provide both sides with a face-saving way out. They allowed Iran to say that we can claim victory, we took action that was unprecedented, can also allow Israel to say that we also achieved victory by shooting down most missiles. I hope that makes sense.
And how does Iran see its position in the region now? Of course, it has its allies and proxies, the so-called axis of resistance. But beyond that, it has been on the telephone repeatedly to foreign ministers in Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates. How does it see its positioning now?
I mean, one major shift is that only a few years ago, countries such as the ones you mentioned, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, would have welcomed a confrontation between Iran and Israel, or Iran and the United States. Things are very different now because partly these countries have initiated normalization processes with Iran. Iran is very eager to continue that process. So I think there's a mutual desire in the region among Iran and its Arab neighbors to lower tensions. And here I think they're joined by the US, they're joined by Europe. So I think the onus right now is on Israel and its next steps.
Mohammed Ali Shabani of Amwaj Media, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News with your reflections and insights into the thinking in Iran after this unprecedented attack. Iran says it did inflict considerable damage. It said its missiles did hit the Netivot air base in southern Israel. Israel admits that, yes, indeed, they did take a direct hit, but say the damage was minimal. So again, as always, Lucy, in war, it's the facts on the ground, but it's also the perception of what happened on the ground, which tends to drive these conflicts.
Least to set there in Jerusalem.